Storytimers, it's your favorite Storytimer, Annie! And one of her best pals, Penguin. And today, we're going to be going back to The Indian in the Cupboard, Chapter 3. If you have this book at home, why not go grab it so we can read together? Where were we? Okay, go to page 41 and I'll start at the beginning. The Indian looked away. For a moment he said, "No." "Why not?" "Dead," said the little bear shortly. "Oh." The Indian finished eating in silence and then stood up, wiping his greasy hands on the sides of his trousers. "Now, do magic. Make things for Little Bear." "What do you want?" "Gun," he answered promptly. "White man's gun. Like English soldier." Omri's brain raced. If a tiny knife could stab, a tiny gun could shoot. Maybe it couldn't do much harm, but then again, maybe it could. "No gun! But I can make you a bow and arrows. I'll have to buy plastic ones, though. What else? A horse?" "Horse." Little Bear seemed surprised. "Don't you ride? I thought all Indians rode." Little Bear shook his head. "Iroquois walk." "But wouldn't you like to ride?" Little Bear stood quite still, frowning, wrestling with this novel idea. At last he said, "Maybe. Show horse. Then I see." Again, Omri rummaged in the biscuit tin. There were a number of horses there. Big, heavy ones for carrying armored knights, smaller ones for pulling gun carriages in the Napoleonic Wars, several cavalry horses. Those might be the best. Omri arranged 5 or 6 of various sizes and colors before Little Bear, whose black eyes began to shine. "I have," he said promptly. "You mean all of them?" Little Bear nodded hungrily. "No, that's too much. I can't have herds of horses galloping all over my room. You can choose one." "One?" said Little Bear steadily. "One." Little Bear then made a very thorough examination of every horse, feeling their legs, running his hands over their rumps, looking straight into their plastic faces. At last he selected a smallish brown horse with 2 white feet that had originally, as far as Omri could remember, carried an Arab brandishing a curved sword at a platoon of French foreign legionaries. Omri lifted the cupboard onto the floor, shut the horse in, and turned the key. Almost at once they could hear the clatter of tiny hooves on metal. They looked at each other with joyful faces. "Open! Open door!" commanded Little Bear. Omri lost no time in doing so. There, prancing and pawing, the white paint, was a lovely, shiny-coated little brown Arab horse. As the door swung open, he shed nervously, turning his face and pricking his ears so far forward that they almost met over his forelock. His tiny nostrils flared, and his black tail plumed above his haunches as he gave a high, shrill neigh. "Neigh!" "Ah!" cried the Little Bear. In a moment, he had vaulted over the bottom edge of the cupboard, and as the horse reared in fright, jumped into the air under its flying hooves and grasped the leather reins. The horse fought to free its head, but Little Bear hung on with both hands. Even as the horse plunged and bucked, the Indian had moved from the front to the side, grasping the high pommel of the saddle. He swung himself into it. He ignored the swinging stirrups, holding on by gripping with his knees. The horse flung himself back on his haunches, then threw himself forward in a mighty buck. Head low, heels flying. To Omri's dismay, Little Bear, instead of clinging on, somehow came loose and flew through the air in a curve, landing on the carpet just beyond the edge of the cupboard. Omri thought his neck must be broken, but he had landed in a sort of somersault and was instantly on his feet again. The face he turned to Omri was shining with happiness. "Crazy horse!" he cried with fierce delight. The crazy horse was meanwhile standing quite still, reins hanging loose, looking watchfully at the Indian through wide-apart eyes. Little Bear made no sudden moves. He stood quite still for a long time, just looking back at the horse. Then, so slowly you could scarcely notice, he edged toward him, making strange hissing sounds between his clenched teeth that almost seemed to hypnotize the horse. Inch by inch, he moved softly, cautiously, until He and the horse stood almost nose to nose. Then, quite calmly, Little Bear reached up and laid his hand on the horse's neck. That was all. He did not hold the reins. The horse could have jumped away, but he didn't. He raised his nose a little so that he and the Indian seemed to be breathing in each other's nostrils. Then, in a quiet voice, Little Bear said, "Now, horse mine, crazy horse mine." Still moving slowly, though not as slowly as before, he took the reins and moved alongside the horse. After a certain amount of fine fiddling, he found out how to unbuckle the straps that held the Arabian saddle, and lifted it off, lying it on the floor. The horse snorted and tossed his head, but did not move. Hissing gently now, the Indian first leaned his weight against the horse's side, then lifted himself up by his arms until he was astride. Letting the reins hang loose on the horse's neck, he squeezed with his legs. The horse moved forward as tame and obedient as you please, and the pair rode once around the inside of the cupboard as if it had been a circus arena. Suddenly, Little Bear caught up the reins and pulled. Oh, sorry, but I forgot to show you there's a picture. You can see Little Bear with his horse, but it looks more like a donkey for some reason, and they're inside the cupboard. Then to one side, turning the horse's head at the same time, kicking him sharply. The horse flailed and bounded forward toward the edge of the cupboard. This metal rim was up to the small horse's chest, like a 5-barred gate to a full-sized horse. There was no room to ride straight at it from the back of the cupboard to the front, so Little Bear rode diagonally, a very difficult angle, yet the horse cleared it in a flying leap. Omri realized at once that the carpet was too soft for him. His feet simply sank into it like soft sand. "Need ground, not blanket," said Little Bear sternly. "Blanket not good for a ride." Omri looked at his clock. It was still only a little after 6 in the morning. At least another hour before anyone else would be up. "I could take you outside," he said hesitantly. "Good," said Little Bear, "but not touch horse. You touch much fear." Omri quickly found a small cardboard box that had held a matchbox lorry. It even had a sort of window through which he could see what was happening inside. He laid that on the carpet with the end flaps open. Little Bear rode the horse into the box, and Omri carefully shut the end up, and even more carefully lifted it. Then, in his bare feet, he carried the box slowly down the stairs and let himself out through the back door. It was a lovely fresh spring morning. Omri stood on the back steps with the box in his hands, looking around for a suitable spot. The lawn wasn't much good. The grass would be over the Indian's head in most places. The terrace at the foot of the steps was no use at all, with its hard, uneven bricks, and the cracks between them. But the path was beaten earth and small stones, real riding ground if they were careful. Omri walked to the path and laid the matchbox carton down. For a moment he hesitated. Could the Indian run away? How fast could such a small horse run? As fast as, say, a mouse? If so, and they wanted to escape, Omri wouldn't be able to catch them. A cat, on the other hand, would. Omri knelt on the path in his pajamas and put his face to the telephone window. The Indian stood inside, holding the horse's head. "Little Bear," he said clearly, "we're outdoors now. I'm going to let you out to ride. But remember, you're not on a prairie now. There are mountain lions here, but they're big enough to swallow you whole, and the horse too. Don't run away. You wouldn't survive. Do you understand?" Little Bear looked at him steadily and nodded. Omri opened the flap, and the Indian horse stepped out into the morning sunlight. Now we go in chapter 4. But this is where we end it. So, this seems to be the end. Tune in next time for more awesome adventures with Anytime Storytime and one of our best pals, Penguin. Goodbye, guys!